Hi everyone, my name is Dennis and this is my quick start guide to my app called GridTracks. And GridTracks is essentially a double entry bookkeeping app that uses the accrual method. Right, so here I have a file called July 2021.gdt, and the first thing I'm going to take you to is the general ledger where you add accounts, because of course before you can create journal entries you have to have the accounts that you post the journal entries to. So the general ledger is actually located under this section called accounts. And you can see here that I have a list of all my accounts in my general ledger. I have the account ID, the account type, and then the account name. And you'll notice that the accounts are sorted by account ID. And actually, it doesn't matter what the account type is. GridTracks only sorts accounts by their account ID. So it's important to pick your account IDs wisely. But right, so if you go to any account, like this pane will show up describing the active account, and you can see that I have all my posts to my general journal. I have the date of the post, the line number from the general journal in which it was posted, the description from the general journal, whether it was debit or credit, and of course the total after the post was made, and then DR would be representing a debit total, and of course CR would be representing a credit total. Right, so of course, now that you've kind of seen how the general ledger looks like, I want to take you into how to add accounts. And there's two ways to do this. The first way is just hit the plus button right here, and you'll be taken to a dialog box where you can add the account. You can only pick an account ID between 1 and 9,999. So if I try 10,000, it's going to tell me that the account ID is out of range. So I'm just going to do 1040. I'm going to call it accounts receivable, Joanne Joy. And the account type, obviously I'm going to set the asset, but first I want to talk to you about these two guys down here. So owner's equity DR represents dividends and drawings, and owner's equity CR represents net equity. Of course, asset is accounts receivable, so I'm going to click on that. So the starting value is sort of the value that the account has before any transactions have been made. And this is really important because, well, you may be starting this document like in the middle of your accounting period, or maybe you already have these accounts that already have these values applied to them before you've created this document. And so it doesn't really make sense to add a new transaction for every single account because those transactions haven't really happened. Those accounts had an initial value. And so that's where you would put the starting value. It's also really important for the next accounting period when you take the ending values of all the accounts and you transfer them over as the starting values for the same accounts in the new document. But that I'll talk about in a little bit. So right, so I'm just going to go ahead and add this account. You've seen that now there's a 1040 asset called AR or accounts receivable, Joanne Joy. The other way to add an account is to go to the modify accounts here. And actually, just as a heads up, to go back to the previous page, just click on this guy and it'll take you back to here. And then to go back to the modify accounts, just hit on this again. Right, so to add an account, you just want to come here to the plus, pick the account you want to add. So maybe I want to add asset again, right? Just note that when you add a new account, you're not like restricted to doing assets just because you hit asset over here. You can still change this to a liability or a revenue and so on and so forth. All right. So the final thing to bring to your attention is the starting values quantity down here. And so basically this sums up all the debit starting values and all the credit starting values, and it tells you the difference between the two. So this is really important because when you add journal entries to your general journal, those entries must be balanced, which of course means that debit and credit posts must amount to the same thing. But if you're applying journal entries to a unbalanced starting values, then no matter how many entries you add, it's not going to make it balanced. So you just want to come here and make sure that the starting values do add up to 0, like debit and credit. They do have a difference of 0. Right, so now that I've shown you how to add accounts to your general ledger, I want to show you how to add transactions to your general journal. So basically the easiest way to do it is just come here to add transaction. And this will take you to the add transaction page where you have the date of transaction, the description, the debit posts, and the credit posts. And you can actually see a bit of a preview down here, which shows you like what the transaction will look like before it's submitted to the general journal. So, for example, I decided that on the 15th of July, I paid off my utility bill. Right, so I'm just going to go ahead and debit utilities expense and I'm paying with bank, so I'm going to credit bank right here. And you can actually see here that in the preview window that this sample shows up. I can, of course, change the date here, maybe, and you can now see that I have some below, some above, but I'm going to leave it at the 15th. And I'm just going to, oh, I should probably, right, so you can also add more than one debit post if you want. And these will be sorted by account ID, as well as in the preview mode. You can see that cash is before utilities expense. And of course, here at the top, it will tell you the total debit posts and the total credit posts, so you can be sure that your transaction is balanced. And actually, if I try to accept changes now, it'll say the transaction is not in balance because my debits don't equal my credits. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this and accept changes, and you can see that my transaction is now showing in my general journal. Of course, I can always edit an account by selecting a line from the transaction and go and edit transaction here. And the difference, of course, between add new and edit is that the date, description, debit post and credit post are already filled in. And then, of course, I can like change the description. I can like change the date if I wanted to. I can delete some posts. I can add new ones, right? I can do whatever I want. And then those changes will be reflected in the document. But I'm just going to cancel out of that. Right, you can also, of course, delete transactions by hitting this guy right here. Don't worry if you accidentally delete a transaction because you can just undo it pretty easily. GridTracks actually supports a pretty extensive undo redo, as you can see here. Right, so the next thing that I want to bring attention to is this move up, move down thing. So basically, like the example here is I have these 3 transactions that have the same date, July 5th, right? And so maybe you'll notice that like, if I go to my bank in the general ledger, you notice I can reconcile my totals with my bank statement. But what's going to happen is that, for example, these 2 entries have the same date. So they're, upon insertion, they're one after another. But like the issue is that they might not be in the order that you see in your bank statement. So if you do like want to switch these 2 in order, well, you just come to the general journal and you maybe want to move this one down, or like you can move this one up. So like you can move them as long as they have the same date. But of course, like because this one is July 6th, this one is July 5th, you can't move it down. And because this one is July 5th and July 4th, you can't move this one up. As you can see, it's grayed out over here. So you can only move them if they have the same date. And that's just because sometimes your bank statement might be put in a different order than you see here. So the move up, move down allows you to rearrange your transactions so that they show up in the right order as you see with your bank statement or with your credit card statement. Right, so the last 3 commands are the find command, and the find command just allows you to find text within your document. So if I type in bank, you'll see that every entry that has the word bank in it shows up here. I can go to the next one, the one after it, or the one before. I can click on these and they show up here as well. Right, so that's the find. You can also do something called multi-select. And multi-select is basically allowing you to select more than one entry at a time. And so the thing about multi-select is that everything else is disabled. And the reason for that is because every other command either requires you to be able to select one transaction or one post. And because multi-select allows you to select multiple, none of these can work. So the main purpose of multi-select is to copy this into another file. So maybe I want to put in a text document. Well, I'm just going to write this guy. If I paste it in, you'll see it shows up like this. And of course, the last one is go to account. And so that will take you to the general ledger, to the account in question, as well as selecting the line number. So if I want to see this particular post to my general ledger, I just have to hit go to account. And it takes me to my general ledger where the post is shown here. And so that's basically all there is to the general journal. Now let's talk about the general ledger. So the first thing to note is this button right here, and it takes you to this account description mode. And this allows you to add information about the account. So maybe for like accounts receivable, you may want like an address, email, maybe like a fax number perhaps. For inventory, you want to like maybe write about the number of items you bought, at what price you bought. So you can either do like FIFO or average cost when you're dealing with inventory. And of course for payroll, you also want your employee information as well, maybe like hours worked, how much you pay them, and so on and so forth. Of course, just like with journal entries, you can also search for text within the account entries or the account posts. You can see like if I look for DR, it shows up here. Unfortunately, you can't search text within the account description yet, but if that is like something, like this sounds important, I will add it in. Right. So this one is, again, multi-select. You can also perform multi-select on general ledger post as well, and it follows the same rules as with the journal entries, where you can't like do things that would involve that require you to be able to only select one line at a time. But notice if I copy this here and I paste it in, you can see that it all pastes in as you would expect. Right. Of course, this will take you back to the general journal, to the line that you have selected. So this will take me to journal line number 22, as you see here. I'm just going to go back again. Of course, you can edit the active account. So like, as I mentioned earlier, the active account is the account that shows up here, and it's done by clicking on one of these guys, and I can actually go and edit my account here. Right. The final thing is, of course, deprecation and deletion, and those I will go into in a little bit. Right. So the last thing I want to show you is first the filter. So if you want to like look for specific accounts, like maybe you just want to see your assets, maybe you want to see everything with a 10 in it, for example, right? Maybe you just want to see accounts receivable. So this will allow you to filter between all those. It's actually case insensitive, which is why card shows up here. Right. And then, of course, I want to take you back to modify accounts just for a really quick recap. So this sort of is a bird's eye view of all your accounts. You can clearly see the account name, ID, type, starting value, and current value. If you want to edit any of this information, just hit this pencil icon right here, and you can change the name, you can change the account ID, the account type, obviously, and the starting value as well. And I can obviously confirm that, and it shows up here now. And I'm just going to undo this and get rid of those changes so it's still balanced. And of course, if you want to go directly to an account in the general ledger from this view, you can just click on this, and it'll take you to this specific account. So if I click on bank loan here, it will take me to the bank loan. If I click on bank here, it will take me to the bank asset, and so on and so forth. I can do one more time. Maybe I want to see utilities expense. So I click on this, and it'll take me to the utilities expense. Right. So now that I've really shown you everything regarding the general ledger and the general journal, I want to start talking to you about summary data. And so basically the summary data is the balance sheet and the income statement, which of course you expect. These are actually generated for you by the account types that you submitted. So of course you have your assets, you have your liabilities, you have your equity and change in equity. The net income here comes from the income statement, where your total revenues minus your total expenses gives you your net income. And of course, you have to worry about your drawings. And you see that total assets is equal to total liabilities plus owner's equity, which is good, as you would expect. But the parts you have to input yourself are the name and then sort of the period. So you'll notice that like for the balance sheet, the starting period is July 1st, ending period is August 1st, and as well for the income statement, you have from July 1st to August 1st. So all of this information is manipulated in the settings page. So the first thing is your company name. So if I change this to maybe something else like the Fresh Cupcaker, which is my made-up company name, you'll see that now when I go to summary data, it says the Fresh Cupcaker's finances here as well. And also like the starting and end date, as I showed you earlier, were assigned to July 1st, 2021 and August 1st, 2021. But I can obviously change this to like maybe like June the 29th. I can change this to August the 3rd, and that will reflect here June 29th, August 3rd, and June 29th to August 23rd. But here's what you want to notice that. So the first entry in my general journal was July the 4th, and the last is July the 15th. So you'll notice that I actually can't assign a start date after July the 4th because that's the date of my first journal entry. And I can't assign a end date before July 15th because that was the date of my last journal entry. And actually, if I omit either both or either, it will default to the first and last entry. So you can see now that the starting date is July 4th, end date is July 15th, as well as here, July 4th, July 15th. Right, so I'm just going to leave these back again. And the last thing I want to talk to you about is is the next accounting period. And so basically the issue is that, so every transaction goes into the general journal, but that can, because like you're putting many transactions every day, over the course of maybe like 3 months, you may have so many transactions in your general journal that it's just very unwieldy to deal with. Also, by splitting it up into separate files, you can get different snapshots for your balance sheets, and you kind of see how your balance sheet changes from month to month. So like what I recommend is that for every month you create a new file. And what's going to happen is that when you hit this file for next accounting period here, what's going to happen is that all these accounts are going to be transferred over to your new file. And all these final values here will be transferred over as the starting values of those accounts. And so then you can start with August 2021 or September 2021 and keep going from there. Right, and the next thing to talk about is, say you are looking to close your entry. So say you're preparing for the next fiscal period, and you're trying to consolidate all your revenues, expenses, drawings, and dividends into your net equity. Well, GridTracks can do that for you. And it's just through this part of the settings right here called Set Up Closing Entry. So the first thing you have to do, of course, is set a closing entry date. And so the date must be on or after the very last journal entry, and it must be before or on the date of the manually assigned end date. So here I can pick any date I want. And actually, if I get rid of the end date, you'll see that I can pick whatever date I want through here. Of course, I'm just going to stick with July 29th, and I'll just bring the end date back to the 1st of August again. Right, so this part is mainly if you have more than one equity account. Maybe if you have multiple owners, you might have like a 3001, a 3010, 3020, and this allows you to allocate the appropriate amount to each equity account. So here we only have one equity account, so I'm going to assign the total negative loss to this equity account. And so, right, so now that I have that, I can apply the closing entries. And you can see here that in my general journal that now I have the closing entry all set up. And everything has been sort of converted to zero. And of course, the owner's equity, being that it's a loss, is also debited here. And if you go to your accounts page, you can see that all your expenses now have a value of 0 due to the closing entry. And so do your revenues. Right, so the thing about applying the closing entry is that when you apply a closing entry, GridTracks is assuming that you're done with the file. And so for that reason, you actually can't edit, add, or delete any transactions, nor can you move them up or down. And you can't add, edit, or delete any accounts either. You can, however, still look at the document, still toggle to the account. You can still do multi-select, you can still search, and you can edit the account description, all of that you want. You just can't do things that would sort of disrupt the closing entry. Right, so the last thing I want to talk to you about is the thing I skipped earlier, which was I was talking to you about the deletion and deprecation of accounts. So the deletion is when you have an account that you might have, I'm just going to get rid of the closing entries right now really quickly. But yeah, so basically the deletion of account is when you create an account maybe in the beginning of the month that you realize you don't really need anymore. So provided that an account has no posts to it, you can delete it. So I can delete John Smith because there's no posts. But it will warn me that the account has a non-zero starting balance. And this is really important because GridTracks allows you to delete accounts that have a starting value. But the problem here is that if I go to my starting values, now there's a difference. So if you do delete an account, you must be wary about this problem. So whenever you delete an account with a starting value, make sure you come here and adjust some of the other starting values so that this difference will go back to 0. Of course, I'm just going to undo, bring John Smith back. Everything is balanced, which is good. And so, right. So basically, that's pretty much it. Oh, and then, sorry. So the deprecation of accounts is for when you have an account that you had used in previous months, but then say the month of August, you realize that maybe Emily Cash is no longer a customer. And so you don't want her on subsequent files because she's not going to be needed anymore. So if you deprecate an account, then when you go to the account, when you come here and hit file for next accounting period, that account will not show up in the new file because you're saying, I don't need this from this point onward, I do not need this account anymore. So for deprecation of accounts, you can delete an account that has posts to it. You just can't, the deprecated account must have an account balance of 0 at the end. So for example, I noticed that Emily Cash has a starting value of $78.95. So if I come to the journal and I create a post, right? So I'm going to say Emily Cash paid her AR. So I'm just going to debit bank by $78.95. I'm going to credit Emily Cash by $78.95. I'm just going to post this really quickly. And you can see here now that even though it has a post, its final value is 0, which means I can deprecate it. And of course, deprecated accounts also have special properties, like you cannot edit a transaction with a deprecated account, nor can you delete a transaction with a deprecated account. And you also can't add deprecated accounts to a new transaction either, because the point of a deprecated account is saying that I don't need this account anymore. I'm going to leave it as it is. And so you can also deprecate accounts and delete accounts too, actually, in this page by hitting these guys. And a deprecated account will show up as a empty star, while a active account will show up as a filled in star. And of course, if you really, you can also come here to deprecate accounts, provided they have a 0 balance. For example, this one, maybe bank, I cannot deprecate it because it has a non-zero start final value. Right. So the final thing I want to show you, other than the home page, in which you can like jump to accounts really quickly. If I want to see AP stock foods, maybe, and of course I can like see certain journal entries by date. So I can maybe see what's on the 5th, what's on the 6th, what's on the 7th. Well, there's nothing on the 7th, but there's something on the 15th for sure. I can like toggle to this line if I wanted to. I can edit this particular transaction, and I can also create a new transaction on this date or on today. And then finally, GridTracks allows you to export to Excel. So I can hit Save As, and if I hit Export to Excel, it will create an Excel document for me that has all the information. So here's a sample Excel document. You can see I have my general journal set up here. I have my balance sheet set up, my income statement, and then of course all the accounts in my general ledger along with the starting values as well. So you can see John Smith, Emily Cash, kitchen equipment, Visa, bank loan, AP, so on and so forth. Right, so that's all there really is to my app. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoy using it, and have a good day. Thanks. Bye.